Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Auto Archive, where today we're diving deep into one of the most striking, polarizing, and ultimately iconic motorcycles ever created, the Suzuki Katana GSX1100S of 1981. This isn't just a bike with sharp edges. It's a story about how one daring design decision could split an industry, ignite controversy, and then shape the DNA of performance machines for decades to come. On the surface, the Katana looks like a sculpted blade on two wheels, but behind that angular styling lies a saga of cultural tension, engineering ambition, and bold risk-taking by Suzuki when it mattered most. By the end of this journey, you'll see why the Katana wasn't merely a motorcycle. It was a statement of rebellion, a test of how far a company could push the limits of design and still survive, and how an object once scorned could later become a beloved legend. We'll begin by setting the stage in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when Japanese manufacturers were locked in an arms race of horsepower, performance, and style. At the time, Honda, Yamaha, and Kawasaki were flooding the market with ever faster superbikes, and Suzuki was desperate to break through with something unique. Conventional curves weren't enough anymore. The company needed a visual identity that screamed speed and aggression even at a standstill. Enter Target Design, a German studio tasked with creating something the world had never seen. What they delivered was the Katana, a machine that seemed more like a futuristic weapon than a traditional motorcycle. But boldness has a cost. When the GSX1100S Katana debuted, many riders recoiled at its angular silhouette, calling it strange or even ugly compared to the flowing lines of its rivals. Suzuki had to confront the brutal truth. Had they gone too far? Was this the kind of design that would alienate loyal customers instead of winning them over? Yet beneath the surface, the Katana's daring design masked a powerhouse engine, proven performance, and a promise that style could merge seamlessly with speed. The real story isn't just about whether the bike sold or not. It's about how this gamble would ripple outward into motorcycle culture, changing how manufacturers thought about aesthetics, aerodynamics, and brand identity. In today's video, we're going to trace the Katana's rise from misunderstood outcast to cultural icon. We'll explore the daring gamble Suzuki made, the challenges of creating such an unconventional design, and the way time transformed this machine from controversial oddball to respected legend. We'll also consider why this bike still matters today, not just as a piece of history, but as a reminder that sometimes the sharpest edges cut the deepest mark. Stay tuned because the Katana's story is just beginning to unfold, and it's one you won't want to miss. In the late 1970s, the global motorcycle scene was buzzing with competition, and Suzuki found itself in a position where standing still meant falling behind. Riders demanded more speed, more power, and sharper handling, but styling trends remained stuck in flowing curves that echoed the past rather than pointing toward the future. Suzuki executives knew that delivering yet another conventional superbike, no matter how fast, would not secure their place in the minds of riders who craved something bolder. This was the environment in which the Katana was born, a project that would deliberately defy convention and force the world to take notice. Micro story, the call to Germany. Instead of relying solely on in-house design, Suzuki made a radical move by reaching out to Target Design, a small German firm led by Hans Muth. Known for his work with BMW motorcycles, Muth had a reputation for challenging traditional forms. He and his team approached the task not as incremental restyling, but as a complete rethinking of what a sport motorcycle could look like. Their goal was to create a machine that projected speed while standing still, something that would break away from the endless cycle of round headlights and bulbous tanks. When the first sketches were revealed, Suzuki executives knew they had something powerful, but also risky. Context Digest, the Japanese arms race. At this time, Japanese manufacturers were locked in a high-stakes contest. Honda had already redefined the market with the CB750, Kawasaki was pushing monstrous displacement with the Z1, and Yamaha had carved a niche with innovative two-strokes. Each company measured success by the ability to dominate in performance numbers and showroom sales, leaving little room for mistakes. Suzuki's GS line delivered strong engines, but styling often lagged behind rivals. If Suzuki wanted to leap ahead, a drastic change was the only option. Micro story, prototype shockwaves. When Suzuki's leadership first saw the Katana prototype, reactions were divided. Some praised its audacity, calling it a fresh wind blowing through a stale industry. Others worried that its sharp lines would alienate traditional buyers. Yet the decision was made to press forward, gambling that boldness would create conversation, and conversation would lead to attention. Suzuki wasn't just releasing another bike, it was firing a shot across the bow of the entire motorcycle world. Reflection bridge. Every gamble carries risk, and Suzuki was about to find out whether innovation would pay off or backfire. The launch of the GSX1100S Katana in 1981 sent ripples across the motorcycle press. Magazine covers debated whether it was genius or madness, while riders argued about whether they would be proud or embarrassed to park one in front of their favorite cafe. But one thing was clear: everyone was talking about it. And in an industry where attention can translate into market power, Suzuki had accomplished the first part of its mission. Microstory, the engine under the blade. Hidden beneath the angular bodywork was Suzuki's mighty 1100cc four-cylinder, a proven powerhouse that delivered immense torque and top-end performance. Unlike some concept-driven machines that sacrifice substance for style, the Katana backed its radical looks with serious muscle. Riders who dared to look past the controversial styling found a machine that could dominate straights and carve corners with authority. The Katana wasn't just design bravado, it was a legitimate superbike contender. Context, digest, aerodynamics, and form. The Katana's unusual silhouette wasn't just for shock value. Target Design had studied airflow and crafted bodywork meant to reduce turbulence and rider fatigue at high speed. The integrated tank and seatline created a cohesive shape that looked futuristic but also offered practical benefits. In an era before wind tunnel testing became standard practice, this emphasis on aerodynamics placed the Katana ahead of its time. Microstory, rebellion on two wheels. For a subset of riders, the Katana was more than a motorcycle. It was a declaration of independence. Choosing one meant rejecting the safe and familiar in favor of the radical and unproven. In cities across Europe and later North America, young enthusiasts flocked to the Katana as a badge of identity, a rolling statement that they weren't interested in blending in. Critics called it polarizing, but fans called it freedom. Reflection bridge. The very polarizing nature of the Katana became its defining strength, and Suzuki leaned into the controversy rather than retreat from it. As the Katana began to appear on roads worldwide, it created a dual reputation, admired by those who valued daring innovation, and dismissed by those who felt tradition should never be abandoned. Yet year after year, its cult following grew stronger, fueled by both performance credentials and its unique presence. It wasn't just another bike in the lineup. It was becoming a cultural touchstone. Context digest. The European influence. Much of the Katana's initial success came from Europe, where riders were more willing to embrace avant-garde design. German magazines praised the machine, and continental riders adopted it enthusiastically. In contrast, the US market reacted more cautiously, reflecting a cultural preference for familiarity. This difference in reception highlighted the global divide in motorcycle tastes and underscored how risky Suzuki's decision had been. Microstory, racing against doubt. Despite being born as a road bike, the Katana also found its way into competition. Tuned versions appeared in endurance racing, where the blend of aerodynamics and engine strength gave it surprising credibility. Seeing the Katana on the track helped soften criticism, as riders realized that its design wasn't mere theater, but a platform that could perform under extreme pressure. This racing pedigree lent the Katana new respect among skeptics. As the 1980s progressed, the Katana's reputation began to stabilize. It had weathered the initial storm of criticism and carved out its own identity. Suzuki had taken a risk that could have ended in disaster, but instead it gave them something invaluable, a bold new design language and a reputation for daring. That foundation would become the launching point for an even deeper impact on the motorcycle world, one that went beyond design and into cultural legacy. With the Katana established as both a lightning rod for debate and a cult favorite among daring riders, Suzuki found itself at an unexpected crossroads. The machine had fulfilled its role as a conversation starter, but now the question was whether it could mature into something more than a curiosity. This was where the stakes grew higher. Would the Katana fade into obscurity as a stylistic oddity, or would it evolve into a cornerstone of Suzuki's brand identity? Micro story. The dealer showroom test. In American dealerships, the Katana drew crowds that often came just to stare. Some buyers hesitated, unsure if they could live with such radical styling, while others signed on the dotted line precisely because it was different. Salesmen quickly learned that the Katana was a heart overhead purchase. It wasn't chosen by riders comparing specs line by line, but by those who wanted to make a statement. In this way, the Katana began to define a new category of rider, one who valued individuality as much as performance. Context digest, shifting design languages. Throughout the early 1980s, the Katana's presence influenced not just Suzuki's lineup, but also the thinking of its competitors. Other brands began experimenting with sharper lines, integrated bodywork, and a more futuristic aesthetic. While none dared to copy the Katana outright, the shift away from purely rounded, traditional forms was unmistakable. The Katana had proven that radical styling, once considered a liability, could force the industry to adapt. Micro story. Endurance glory. The Katana wasn't only a road icon, it began to earn serious credibility in long-distance endurance racing. In events like the Suzuki 8 Hours, modified Katanas showcased their ability to sustain speed and reliability over punishing hours of competition. This success helped cement its reputation as more than a pretty or polarizing face. Fans could point to real-world performance achievements as proof that Suzuki's gamble wasn't only aesthetic, it was functional. Reflection bridge. Racing validation gave the Katana substance, turning a controversial design into a proven competitor. As its cult following grew, so did the myths surrounding the bike. Owners treated their machines as works of art, customizing and preserving them with devotion. Motorcycle magazines began to revise earlier criticisms, noting that the Katana had aged better than expected, its sharp lines now reading as bold rather than bizarre. Suzuki, meanwhile, recognized that the Katana had created an entirely new kind of brand loyalty, one rooted in passion rather than conformity. Micro story, custom culture catalyst. The Katana also found a second life as a canvas for customization. Builders across Japan and Europe reimagined the machine with turbochargers, extended swing arms, and wild paint schemes, amplifying its already radical nature. Far from diluting the original design, these customs magnified its rebellious aura. The Katana wasn't just influencing factory styling, it was shaping the underground culture of modification. Context digest. The early icon effect. By the mid-1980s, the Katana had transitioned from controversial newcomer to recognized symbol. Collectors began setting aside pristine examples, predicting that their rarity and unique design would make them valuable in years to come. At the same time, everyday riders continued to thrash them on highways and mountain passes, proving the bike could live two lives, one as an artifact and one as a tool of pure riding pleasure. Micro story, global ripples. Beyond Japan, Europe, and the US, the Katana sparked reactions worldwide. In markets where bold styling was rare, it became an exotic dream machine, admired in magazines and posters even if few could afford it. This global footprint gave Suzuki something priceless, a reputation not just for engineering reliability, but for daring to lead in design. It was no longer simply one of the big four Japanese brands, it was the company that had created the Katana. Reflection bridge. What began as a divisive gamble was transforming into a cultural export that carried Suzuki's name across borders. Yet with all its growing acclaim, the Katana also highlighted the limits of radical design. By the mid to late 1980s, motorcycle fashion shifted again toward fully fared sport bikes, and Suzuki itself introduced models that eclipsed the Katana's performance. The GSX-R line captured the spotlight, leaving the Katana to age quietly in the background. But instead of disappearing, it became a time capsule, a reminder of the moment Suzuki dared to shock the world. Context digest. The shadow of the GSX-R. When the GSX R750 debuted in 1985, it redefined sport biking with its race-bred technology and lighter weight. Compared to this revolution, the Katana seemed heavy and dated. Yet, rather than killing its reputation, the GSX-R's success only underscored how bold Suzuki had become in the first half of the decade. The company had gone from a follower to a leader, and the Katana had paved the way. Micro story. Survivor stories. As newer machines dominated the streets, many Katanas were retired, tucked into garages or sold cheaply, but a subset of enthusiasts held onto theirs, forming clubs and networks that kept the legend alive. These communities preserved not only the bikes themselves, but also the narrative of rebellion they embodied. By nurturing this legacy, they ensured the Katana would never be forgotten. The Katana's story in the 1980s is one of transformation. From a controversial debut to a respected symbol, from a misunderstood oddity to a foundation for Suzuki's boldness. As the decade closed, the bike's cultural imprint had already spread farther than its sales figures could measure. But the most fascinating part of its legacy was still to come, as time itself would elevate the Katana from a relic of the past to a timeless icon of daring design. As years passed into the 1990s and 2000s, the Katana began to undergo a remarkable metamorphosis in reputation. What was once mocked as too angular or too futuristic slowly became celebrated as visionary. Collectors, journalists, and younger riders who had grown up seeing the Katana on posters began to reassess its role in motorcycle history. The bike that divided opinions at launch was now widely seen as one of Suzuki's most daring and influential achievements. Microstory: the collector's hunt. By the early 2000s, finding an original GSX1100S Katana in good condition became a quest for enthusiasts. Prices, once modest, started to climb as the motorcycle community realized how few unmolested examples remained. Owners who had preserved their machines suddenly found themselves holding valuable artifacts. The Katana transformed from a controversial showroom oddity into a blue-chip collectible, its sharp lines now regarded as timeless rather than strange. Context Digest: design in retrospect. Motorcycle historians began pointing out how much the Katana had influenced later sport bike styling. The integration of tank and seat, the emphasis on aerodynamics, and the willingness to abandon round headlights all foreshadowed trends that would dominate the industry. Looking back, it was clear the Katana hadn't been a detour. It had been a glimpse of the road ahead. Microstory: pop culture blade. Beyond the collector market, the Katana carved a place in pop culture. Appearances in films, video games, and Japanese manga elevated its aura as the motorcycle of rebels and outsiders. To a new generation, the Katana was less about 1980s controversy and more about raw cool factor. Its silhouette became shorthand for sharpness, speed, and individuality, making it recognizable even to people who had never ridden a motorcycle. Reflection bridge. What once was ridiculed as strange had now become celebrated as iconic. The revival of the Katana. Name in later decades demonstrated how deeply it had embedded itself in Suzuki's. Now, when Suzuki reintroduced updated Katana models, they leaned heavily on the visual cues of the 1981 original. The aggressive stance, the angular bodywork, the unmistakable blade-like profile. This was more than a nostalgic callback. It was a recognition that the Katana's rebellious spirit still resonated in a modern era. Microstory: the 2019. Rebirth nearly 4 decades after the original, Suzuki unveiled a new Katana built on the GSX1100S platform. While updated with modern electronics and performance, its styling deliberately echoed Hans Muth's groundbreaking design. The bike stood as a bridge between past and present, appealing both to veteran riders who remembered the shock of 1981 and to newcomers who admired its bold heritage. The reimagined Katana proved that some designs never lose their cutting edge. Context Digest: market shifts. By the 2010s, the motorcycle market had changed dramatically. Riders prioritized technology, safety, and versatility, while retro-inspired machines gained popularity. Against this backdrop, the Katana revival showed that heritage could be as powerful a sales tool as horsepower. It wasn't about competing with the latest supersport. It was about carrying forward a story that still captured imaginations. Microstory: community legacy. Around the world, Katana clubs and gatherings began celebrating anniversaries of the original model. Events in Japan, Europe, and North America highlighted not just the machines, but also the culture of defiance they symbolized. Owners rode in parades, shared restoration tips, and told stories about why they had chosen a bike that once turned heads for all the wrong reasons. These communities kept the Katana alive not as nostalgia, but as living history. Reflection bridge. The Katana had crossed from controversial product into enduring legend. carried by the very riders who once took a chance on it. As more retrospectives and documentaries appeared, the Katana's place in history became cemented. It wasn't just remembered as the weird Suzuki, it was respected as the motorcycle that dared to push design into uncharted territory. Every sharp angle, every polarized reaction became part of its myth. By the time motorcycle museums began dedicating exhibits to it, the Katana had completed its journey from rebel outsider to celebrated classic. Context Digest, Legacy in Design Schools. Today, design students often study the Katana as an example of how risk and vision can redefine an entire industry. Its lines are dissected not as quirks but as purposeful strokes that broke the cycle of repetition. In this way, the Katana continues to educate and inspire far beyond the showroom, proving that great design transcends time and market trends. Micro story. A timeless blade. Riders who swing a leg over a well-kept Katana today describe an experience that feels raw yet elegant. The bike's weight, power delivery, and unique ergonomics remind them of an era when motorcycles were more visceral, less filtered by electronics. For many, riding a Katana is less about speed and more about connecting with the bold spirit of 1981. That feeling, the sense of piloting a rolling piece of art, is why the Katana still matters. The journey of the Katana GSX1100S reveals a truth that resonates across the automotive world. Risk and rebellion, though painful at first, can yield legacies that outlast trends and technologies. From ridicule to reverence, the Katana proves that daring to be different is sometimes the only way to carve a permanent place in history. And so, what began as a blade against the curve has become a blade that never dulls. The Katana's journey from controversial debut to celebrated icon leaves us with more than just a motorcycle story. It leaves a lesson about vision, risk, and cultural impact. Suzuki didn't just build another superbike. It dared to reshape how motorcycles could look and feel, knowing full well that the gamble could backfire. That gamble paid dividends not in immediate sales dominance, but in long-term influence, inspiring future designs, sparking new communities, and carving a reputation for courage into Suzuki's brand identity. When we step back, the Katana reminds us that the most meaningful innovations often face rejection before they earn respect. In the early 1980s, it looked like a dangerous miscalculation. Today, it stands as a design landmark. Its sharp edges, once divisive, have become part of the DNA of modern sport motorcycles, proving that boldness can echo across generations. For enthusiasts, the Katana offers two experiences at once: the thrill of raw performance from its muscular engine, and the satisfaction of knowing they ride a piece of history that once challenged the status quo. For collectors, it offers tangible proof that time can transform perception, elevating a misunderstood machine into an object of desire. For Suzuki, it remains a reminder that leadership sometimes requires walking away from the safe path. And for us, the story of the Katana carries a broader truth. Whether in design, engineering, or culture, the willingness to cut against the grain can be the very thing that secures a lasting legacy. The Katana's blade, honed in 1981, still shines today, not because it followed trends, but because it defied them. Thanks for riding with us on Auto Archive. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.